In 2015, I made it my goal to find a perennial plant that could provide significant amounts of food with minimal resources and input from the farmer or homesteader or whoever plants it. I wanted to find a plant that was very diverse in the types of climates that it could be grown in, and a plant that's very drought tolerant and able to withstand many of the weather changes that has been brought on by man-made climate change. I realized that plant that I was looking for was Opuntia ficus indica, also known as the prickly pear cactus. Now, these plants are not a food that's cultivated very often in North America, but in India, the Middle East, and especially Mexico, where the native plants grow, it is a very common food to eat both the pads and the fruit. So it's a plant that provides a vegetable and a very tasty fruit. The pads can be used to create a plant-based leather, and you can also use the plant to create biofuels. So there is multiple applications. One of the reasons why it seems like we do not farm this plant in North America could be because of the hard frost and the snow in a lot of the North American regions. So it tends to be farmed in the lower latitudes. Although these plants are frost tolerant when they're in an environment with very hard frosts or snow, a lot of the times they could become stunted and their growth rate slows down dramatically. Although they might survive the frost or the snow, they tend to not be productive in environments where that happens because the frost damage prevents new pads from coming up. My goal was to find a strain that could survive very hard frosts and snows while also remaining very productive. Throughout my search, I realized that there is a bit of an unrevealed history. Historically, the first culture that hybridized and cultivated these plants was the Aztecs, as far as we know. When the Spaniards came from Europe and colonized the country we now know as Mexico, originally it was the Aztec civilization, and this was one of their primary farmed crops. So as the Spaniards came to colonize California, a lot of the opuntia strains were hybrids that had been cultivated for generations, and individual family farmers had their own unique strains. Some of them were grown at higher elevations in colder environments, and they brought those up to California. This was before societies really started monoculture farming, and it was very common for family farms to have their own strains and hybrids of different species. And this variety in genetics is important because many of these plants have different flavors and, more importantly, are adapted to different types of environments, and some of them are more resistant to different diseases. And this is true with any plant. But opuntias are so adaptable that they just tend to survive for hundreds of years without any maintenance at all. So among my search, I was finding, especially in California, there are these plants that have been growing for who knows how long, massive plants, and they have very unique traits compared to what is commonly grown. I even talked to some experts on opuntias, and I was unable to identify these various strains. And they told me it's common that there are so many different varieties, there are not names for everything. I continued my search, and I collected more different types of opuntias than I even remember. The next step in the mission that I gave myself was to find a small property that I could afford that had a very hot, dry, arid environment that also got very cold and snowed in the winter, so that I could test out which strains did the best. In the first year, I identified different traits that were linked to tolerance of extreme frost and snow situations. The problem was those strains were often very slow growing and may not be commercially productive or productive for a family trying to sustain off of the plant. But at least I knew the traits to look for now. I continued searching. I eventually found a plant that grew extremely fast in comparison to those other plants, while also having the frost-tolerant capabilities. So this was the hybrid that I decided to focus on. In 2017, I started testing this strain, and year after year, it survived extreme frost conditions, extreme drought conditions, and continued to be productive every single year. It grows very vertically, and it is more productive in that environment than any other strain that I've grown. Before I wanted to discuss my project online, I wanted to make sure to test out what I was doing. So over the years, I have tested it out, and this strain is something special. So strains similar to what I'm growing could be grown in most states in the US because of their cold tolerance and drought tolerance and heat tolerance. One of the challenges that I face is that I can only produce clones of this plant as fast as I'm able to. And I just don't have enough of a supply, and I'm unable to produce it fast enough from that limited supply that I have to provide this plant to farmers, homesteaders. If I had more controlled environments, or I was able to grow it in different regions, I might be able to actually produce it exponentially faster. If these plants were to be planted by seed, they may lose some of the properties that make them so special. So this hybrid strain needs to be grown by clones. In my other videos, I will be discussing how to identify these cactus strains and how to clone them, as well as other farming methods that I believe could benefit people that are trying to guerrilla farm or homestead. I believe that as a society, we need to be a bit more prepared for some of the climate changes that may happen pretty soon.